You live?
Yeah, I've just started it. How do I?
So you can see your attendees. 10? Hello, everyone. Hi, Jessica.
Maisha, Martha, Melissa, Miranda.
Agosa, hi. Rafaela, that's one of mine. Give us a wave, guys, if you can. Hi, Melissa.
Okay, guys, so can you all hear me? Give me a thumbs up if you can hear me. Oh, hello, special guests.
Oh, Bella, hi.
2 meters away.
Oh.
Oh, yeah, good. That's lots of 8H. Excellent.
I like this one. Hi, phone.
Hi, Huawei P10 Plus. Charlize, one of mine. Cora, mine. Fatima, mine.
Can you see us?
Sophia,
no, we can't
mine.
see you
No,
guys.
we can't see
No.
you. You can just see your names popping up.
Yes. Yeah, make sure your video isn't on, guys.
I think even if it wasn't, you wouldn't be able to see them.
No.
Oh, brilliant. Okay, we'll get going in a couple of minutes, guys. Just wait for anyone to turn up.
Hi, Dora.
No, Isabel, we can't hear you. You can communicate through chatting. So you're going to have about an hour of my voice.
They coped really well with just listening to me for an hour last time.
Can you be sure they weren't just going away and making themselves a Ribena?
They were all asleep.
Hi, Emily.
Ribena is maybe like the watchword of lockdown. Go make yourself a Ribena. Dora and Cora, mine. Sky, mine. Don't know which Sophie that is. So.
Looks like it's a lot of yours, Nick.
Scarlett is mine.
Hi, Sky. Enjoy your lesson, guys.
Okay, so we'll just
Misha, mine.
we'll just wait for about 2 more minutes.
I'm like one of the seagulls from Finding Nemo. Mine.
Why did you all do the look, Cora? I'm not entirely sure what you mean by the look. So hopefully you've all got access to either a copy of the text or to a digital version of it. When we read, I will be putting it on the screen as well, so you can follow along. Thank you very much to those of you who asked some questions in advance. I'll be answering those in a second. Okay, so just gonna wait about another minute before we crack on, and then I'm gonna share my screen with you. Just make sure everything's where it should be. Yes, lovely. Fantastic. Okay, so we've got about 49 of you attending, which is absolutely fantastic. Great to see so many of you getting involved. I'm going to try and do this every week with a different chapter, so you get as much time as possible with a teacher. It might be me every week. We might see if we can get some other teachers to come along and do it as well. Okay, so it's 1 o'clock now. So we'll crack on. Okay, I'm going to share my screen with you so that you can hear and sort of see what's going on. So hopefully you should be able to see that now. Melissa, it will be no more than an hour, so we'll finish before 2 o'clock. Okay. Can everyone see my screen? Can you see my screen? Have I done that properly? No. Okay. So let me. Okay. So hopefully you can see my screen now. Is that okay? Can you see my screen? You can't. You can see me only. Okay, hang on. Right, okay, actually, I think I've done it properly. So you should be able to see my screen now. Brilliant. Let's see if I can get the chat up as well so I can see you. So everyone got my screen now, yes? Fantastic. So we've got the screen going. Brilliant. Okay, so chapter 4. So what we're going to do today is to consolidate our understanding of the plot and themes of the novel so far. I think because it's a webinar, your video's off already and you're muted. Do as we're going through, try and avoid distractions as best as you can. I know it's not always easy, but just do your best. Make sure your phone's out of reach, and if you're in as quiet a room as possible, that will help you. And try to make sure you have a copy of the text. Like I say, I'm going to show you the screen, so we'll show it to you on the screen. So to start off with, and I know like from some of the people that I've spoken to, there's been some kind of difficulty with just getting hold of like exactly what the plot is. So I'm going to start just by going through the plot of chapters 1, 2, and 3. Okay, so these are just copied and pasted from www.sparknotes.com/lit/flies. Okay, that is a really, really good resource for you to just be able to know what's going on. So all of these summaries come exactly from that. Okay. So, chapter 1, a fair-haired boy lowers himself down some rocks toward a lagoon on a beach. He encounters a chubby boy who's got glasses on. So the fair-haired boy is Ralph and the chubby one is Piggy. And we learn that we're in the midst of a war situation and there's been a transport plane carrying a group of English public school boys that was shot down over the ocean, and it lands in a thick jungle on a deserted island. All of the adults are dead, and some of the boys survive, but they're sort of scattered into different parts of the island and they can't find the pilot. So Ralph and Piggy are walking around the beach wondering what has become of some of the other boys, and they find this conch, okay, which is a big kind of shell, and Piggy realizes he can use this as a kind of trumpet to sort of make a big noise that can summon everyone. Okay, so he convinces Ralph to blow through the shell and they find all of the other boys. Okay, so the boys start to struggle onto the beach. The oldest is 12, the youngest is 6. And there's a boys' choir there as well, dressed in black, and they're led by an older boy named Jack. So they march the beach in these two parallel lines. Jack snaps at them to stand to attention, and the boys take the mick out of Piggy, and they mock his appearance and his nickname. So you can already see some of the ideas and themes emerging here, especially this kind of idea of authority and control, okay? So it's interesting that even in this situation, a leader is sort of starting to emerge, and that's what they do. So they elect a leader. The choir boys vote for Jack, who is the leader of the choir, but all of the other boys vote for Ralph. So there's a little bit of a power struggle here. Ralph wins the vote overall, but Jack clearly wants the position, so there's some conflict there. Ralph asks the choir to serve as the hunters for a band of boys, and he asks Jack to lead them. They know they need to explore the environment, so Ralph chooses Jack and a choir member named Simon to go off and explore the island, even though that's what Piggy wants to do. Piggy wants to be picked, but Ralph chooses Jack and Simon to do that. Okay. Poppy, yes, character profiles as you're going through the book do add to them. Yeah, and it should say in the booklet as you're going through that, just add to the character profiles, absolutely. So they're really excited actually at the start and about exploring the island, and they start to feel this bond between them. They play together in the jungle, and they reach the end of the jungle where there are these rocks that are jutting towards the mountains, and they climb up the steep hills, and they can see from very high up there are no signs of civilization. They're the only sort of live things on this island, or humans on this island. It's a really beautiful view. They kind of feel like they're in their own new world. Yes, Stella. So we never hear about the pilot. It's assumed that the pilot is dead. Yeah. But obviously they need food. So on their way back towards the beach after exploring, they find this wild pig caught in some vines. Jack, who's the hunter, goes to kill it with a knife, but actually realizes he can't do it. And the pig frees itself and runs away. And Jack's quite embarrassed by this and thinks, oh, actually, next time I will be brave enough to do this. Okay, so chapter 1 ends with them all returning to the beach. Chapter 2, so they get back to the beach. Ralph sounds the conch, summons the boys to a meeting, and says there are no adults on the island, and they're going to need to organise some things to look after themselves, okay? So Jack reminds Ralph of the pig they found in the vines in the jungle, and they agree that they'll need hunters to kill animals for meat. Ralph says, at the meetings, the conch will be used to determine which boy has the right to speak. Whoever holds the conch shell will speak, and the others will listen silently until they receive the shell in their turn, and Jack agrees with that idea. So Piggy gets annoyed again about the fact that no one knows they've crashed on the island and they could be stuck there for some time, and he thinks they'll be stranded for a long period, and that worries him. And it kind of frightens everyone else. And remember, there are quite a few younger children in the group as well. And then one of the youngest children claims that he saw a snake-like beastie or a monster the night before. And again, so from this kind of excitement in the first chapter almost, there's a kind of creeping sense of sort of fear about their environment seeping in. So they start to think about how they could be rescued. So Ralph organises a large signal fire to be built at the top of the island's central mounting, so that any passing ships would see it and know that someone was trapped. And they get very excited by the thought, boys and fire, and they rush off to the mountain, and Ralph and Piggy lag behind, and Piggy carries on whining about the childishness and stupidity of the group, and he's sort of quite an annoying character at this point, actually. So they collect all of this dead wood. They use Piggy's glasses to focus the sunlight and set the wood on fire. That's the only method of creating fire that they have. But it very quickly dies down. And again, Piggy gets very angry and says people need to be more efficient and better if they want to get off the island. But no one really listens to Piggy. He's saying actually all these quite important, sensible things, but he's quite whiny and annoying, and no one really listens to him. Jack volunteers his group of hunters to be responsible for keeping the signal fire going, and they're not very well organised. They don't listen to each other. They don't cooperate as a team, and they actually set a whole load of trees on fire on the island. And Piggy tells them furiously that one of the littlest boys, in fact, actually the same boy who told them about the snake, was playing by the fire and is now missing. They think they've killed him, and the boys are shocked, and Ralph is full of shame. And well, this is quite interesting. They pretend that nothing's happened. So they pretend it hasn't happened. And that's something we all sort of tend to do, isn't it? If we've done something that we're a little bit of ashamed of, it's quite easy to sort of pretend that it's not happened instead of facing up to the consequences of what we've done and maybe kind of learning from our mistakes. Misha, so I am reading the chapter summaries of chapter 1, 2, and 3 of what we have, of what you should have read so far before we go on to reading chapter 3. Okay? So in chapter 3, Jack has got this sort of sharpened stick that's a bit like a spear, and he hunts a pig through the jungle, but it gets away. He's annoyed and he walks back to the beach, and he finds Ralph and Simon building huts for the younger boys to live in. The huts keep falling down, and this is annoying Ralph. That's all I miss you. So they're making the houses. Some of the other boys are splashing about and playing in the lagoon and not actually helping out. And Ralph's a little bit annoyed by this. And what's kind of happening is everyone's getting excited by the plans that they're making to live on the island, but no one's actually contributing and helping with the work. Okay. And actually, Ralph points out Jack's hunters haven't caught any pigs, so they've got very little food. But Jack's pretty confident that they'll have some more success soon. He tells Jack about his concerns. Ralph worries about some of the smaller children having nightmares and not being able to sleep, but Jack's kind of preoccupied with wanting to kill a pig, basically. Ralph is annoyed that Jack isn't working on the huts, and kind of Ralph says, Jack and the hunters are actually just avoiding work. They're not doing the important work of building huts. They say they're going off hunting, but actually they're just going off and playing and having fun and not really doing anything to help the others. So there's this kind of power struggle that's building up between Jack and Ralph all the way through. Jack's annoyed that he wasn't elected leader. Ralph's getting annoyed with Jack not pulling his weight. So they're kind of struggling for this kind of leadership role. But to try and get a sense of camaraderie back, they go swimming together in the lagoon, but actually it doesn't really do anything, and their feelings of mutual dislike sort of remain and fester. Simon then wanders through the jungle alone. He helps some of the younger boys, the little ones, get some fruit from a branch. And then Simon comes across this glade, so a beautiful open space of flowers and birds and butterflies. And the chapter ends with him just sort of making sure he's alone and just having a moment in this sort of beautiful place, marveling at the abundance and beauty of life that surrounds it. And that's another really important part of this novel, the contrast. Remember, in English, we call that opposites juxtaposition, the juxtaposition of the beautiful environment and the increasing sense of kind of like chaos and anger and fear amongst the boys. So we've got this beautiful location and this kind of group of people that are slowly falling apart. So that's what you got up to with Miss Roberts. Miss Roberts asked you to, that's where so that's where we got up to, or that's where you should have got up to, okay? So I asked you to send in some questions about the book and about your reading and some of the things, and I had some really, really interesting questions come up. Okay, so I just want to deal with those now. Firstly, why did the plane crash and where was it going? Okay, so the plane, I did deal with this a little bit before. The plane was it was a transport plane. It was bringing the boys back, but it's a time of war. So the boys had been somewhere. It's taking them back, and that's when it's shot down. So we don't know exactly what the war is. It's kind of left deliberately ambiguous, but it's shot down as part of a war from taking the boys back to their home, which is England. It's really important because war, this idea of war, is a very important theme. Golding, when he wrote this, was really, really fascinated, in particular by the Second World War and some of the things that happened in the Second World War. Some of those things, of course, that we talked about when we did the Language and Power Unit at the start of the year, when we were looking at Holocaust writing in particular, and how war had led to people behaving in an incredibly inhumane way, in an evil way. How people could behave incredibly evilly just because someone had told them to. And Golding really, through this book, wanted to explore what made people do some of those terrible things. And so it's really important that the plane is shot down because of war. That feeds into the next question, really, really intelligent question. Is the novel an allegory? And if so, what's its meaning? Allegory is a really great word to use in English. An allegory is a story where what happens in the story is a symbol. It has a deeper meaning. So the characters represent a deeper meaning. Very often a kind of lesson about life. At the end of year 7, you would have read an allegorical story, which is Animal Farm. And if you remember, the story of the pigs on the farm was actually George Orwell's way of talking about what happened during the Russian Revolution. This isn't connected to a specific historical event as an allegory, but certainly, even though Golding is writing about boys stranded on an island, really, what he's writing about, I don't want to answer this in too much detail because I want you to kind of find out what the allegory is as we read through the novel. But what Golding is really interested in is this idea of what makes people do really cruel and evil things, and what are the impacts of war and conflict on society. Okay, so that gives you a little bit of a hint as to what the allegory is. And then, was there a snake on the island? Really, really important question, because it's not clear. One of the little ones sees a snake-like creature. And of course, the little one that sees that then goes missing because of the fire. Piggy tells him, or tells the characters, that this kid has gone missing. It's really significant, and I'm really glad you picked this up, that the character is a snake. Because the snake is something that is used in literature very, very often and very, very specifically. Sorry, Poppy, I've just seen your message. I'm not entirely sure why that's happening. It might be something to do with your internet connection. Can everyone else hear? Is everyone else okay? Could you just type yes or no into the... Okay. Brilliant. Fantastic. So I think it might be... if I just... Yeah, it says you're part of the group, Poppy. So we'll just sort of have to try and crack on. Okay. I sometimes glitch out. Yes. Okay. Cool. So the snake. Was there a snake on the island? We don't know for sure, at this point in the novel whether the snake-like monster that the little one has seen is real or a figment of his imagination. But what is really significant is the snake or the serpent as a symbol, and it comes from the Bible. If you remember kind of RE in primary school, in Christianity, you have the Garden of Eden and Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, and they are in paradise. Do you remember when I was talking about the islands sort of seeming a little bit like paradise when Simon goes and sits in this kind of beautiful clearing? It seems like paradise. So Adam and Eve exist in paradise, and they will continue to exist in paradise, God tells them, until you're ahead of me, Charlize, well done. Until Adam and Eve, or God tells Adam and Eve, they can do whatever they want as long as they do not eat, there's one on the table, an apple from the tree of knowledge. Okay. So really simple. They live in perfect harmony in paradise. They just can't eat the apple. But then a serpent comes along and starts manipulating them and convincing them to eat the apple. And eventually the apple is eaten. And that is what lets sin into the world in Christian mythology. Okay, so sin and evil started when Adam and Eve decided to eat the apple from the tree. So, Hermela, was the snake the devil? Does the snake represent the devil in the novel? I wouldn't say the snake or the idea of a snake directly represents the devil, but the snake is more of a representation of a kind of sense of evil. And remember what I'm saying, like Golding is really, really fascinated about what makes people evil, what makes people do evil things, what makes good people do evil things. Also saw a question just come up there. Why is everyone so mean to Piggy? Really, really good question. Just before we crack on with our reading. Why is everyone mean to Piggy? In fact, actually, in the chat, does anyone want to have a go at answering that question? Why do you think everyone is so mean to Piggy? Because he looks different, Phoebe. Yeah, definitely. And obviously we know that, like, sometimes, you know, people's looks can have an impact on being bullied. Absolutely. People talking about his weight. Sky, you say he's not like everyone else. Can you just explain a little bit more why you think he's not like everyone else? Kezia, because he's responsible and all the others want to have fun, because children pick on people who look or act different, because he's a bit more mature and everyone gets a bit offended by him. Fantastic. He wants everything to be perfect. Yeah, that's a nice idea, Angel. Lovely. He's not the same as everyone. Brilliant. Some really nice ideas there. Definitely the character of Piggy does seem a little bit annoying. Yes, Maria, he is a perfectionist, and Arcosa's right as well. He's quite controlling, and when he doesn't get his own way, he sees he gets quite annoyed. Okay, but also, like, there's a sense of what he's saying is actually quite important, but the others are kind of threatened by that. The fact that what he's saying kind of makes a lot of sense, kind of annoys everyone else, because they're in a world full of adults, so they've just kind of left this world where they're controlled, and they almost don't want that. So when and lots of you, like Hermela, are saying he's controlling, he absolutely is controlling, but maybe the young people want freedom, Sophie, actually. Yeah, he thinks logically, but the boys want freedom. Absolutely. Yeah, Brandy, it seems like he wants to be the leader and he controls everyone. And the kids don't want to be controlled. They've spent their lives being controlled by adults, and they think they're in a situation now where they can live how they want to live. But that might have some consequences. And Cora, I think you're absolutely right. Maybe it comes from him only wanting the best for them. But perhaps the boys can't see that. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing this screen, and I am going to just very quickly get my copy of the novel up, which I will then share. And so what we're going to do, we're going to read chapter 3 and go through it, and hopefully, chapter 4, and that will help you, I think. Okay, so let me I'm going to share another screen here. Lord of the Flies, fantastic. So you should all have, can you all see the screen with the text on it? Fantastic. Good. So let's skim down to chapter 4. This is going to go quite quickly. Do you remember whenever I'm putting this on class charts, guys? Yes, Amber, we're going to read it now. So when we go on, Jamelia says this is hilarious. Thank you. So we're going to, chapter 4, painted faces and long hair. So do remember, whenever I set this on class charts, I'm putting a link to an audio book as well. I know it's got a weird sort of American voice, but we'll, so there's lots of different ways to read it. Okay, so chapter 4, painted faces and long hair. The first rhythm they became used to was the slow swing from dawn to quick dusk. They accepted the pleasures of morning, the bright sun, the whelming sea and sweet air as a time when play was good and life so full that hope was not necessary and therefore forgotten. Yes, that's right, Amber, I can read that. Toward noon, as the flood of light fell more nearly to the perpendicular, the stark colours of the morning were smoothed in pearl and opalescence, and the heat, as though the impending sun's height gave it momentum, became a blow that they ducked, running to the shade and lying there, perhaps even sleeping. Strange things happened at midday. The glittering sea rose up, moved apart in planes of blatant impossibility. The coral reef and the few stunted palms that clung to the more elevated parts would float up into the sky, would quiver, be plucked apart, run like raindrops on a wire, or be repeated as in an odd succession of mirrors. Sometimes land loomed where there was no land and flicked out like a bubble as the children watched. Piggy discounted all this learnedly as a mirage. So mirage is kind of like a hallucination, okay? Something that seems like it's there, but isn't there. And since no boy could reach even the reef over the stretch of water where the snapping sharks waited, they grew accustomed to these mysteries and ignored them, just as they ignored the miraculous, throbbing stars. At midday, the illusions merged into the sky, and there the sun gazed down like an angry eye. Then, at the end of the afternoon, the mirage subsided, and the horizon became level and blue and clipped as the sun declined. That was another time of comparative coolness, but menaced by the coming of the dark. When the sun sank, darkness dropped on the island like an extinguisher, and soon the shelters were full of restlessness under the remote stars. Nevertheless, the Northern European tradition of work, play, and food right through the day made it possible for them to adjust themselves wholly to this new rhythm. The little and Percival had crawled early into a shelter and stayed there for 2 days, talking, singing and crying, till they thought him batty, which means mad, and were faintly amused. Ever since then, he had been peaked, red-eyed and miserable, a Lytton who played little and cried often. I've just seen your message, Haramella, that I'm reading a little bit too fast. I'm a little bit worried about time. I'll try and slow down. This will be going up on YouTube as well after the session as well. So you will be able to go back to it as well, but I will try and slow down slightly, okay? So, the smaller boys were now known by the generic title of little uns. The decrease in size from Ralph down was gradual, and though there was a dubious region inhabited by Simon and Robert and Morris, nevertheless no one had any difficulty in recognising big uns at one end and little uns at the other. The undoubted little uns, those aged about 6, led a quite distinct and at the same time intense life of their own. They ate most of the day, picking fruit where they could reach it and not particular about ripeness and quality. They were now used to stomach aches and a sort of chronic diarrhea. They suffered untold terrors in the dark and huddled together for comfort. Apart from food and sleep, they found time for play, aimless and trivial in the white sand by the bright water. They cried for their mothers much less often than might have been expected. They were brown and filthily dirty. They obeyed the summons of the conch, partly because Ralph blew it and he was big enough to be a link with the adult world of authority, and partly because they enjoyed the entertainment of the assemblies. But otherwise, they seldom bothered with the big uns, and passionately emotional, and their passionately emotional and corporate life was their own. It's a really interesting way of describing their life. Corporate kind of refers to kind of business, and it kind of, so the kind of little uns and the big uns are very, very separated off. Misha, I'm just scrolling down, so we're now going right from the top of the screen. So they have built castles, okay? They had built castles in the sand at the bar of the little river. These castles were about 1 foot high and were decorated with shells, withered flowers, and interesting stones. Round the castles was a complex of masks, tracks, walls, railway lines that were of significance only if interpreted with the eye at beach level. The little uns played here, if not happily at least, with absorbed attention, and often as many as 3 of them would play the same game together. 3 were playing here now. Henry was the biggest of them. He was also a distant relative of that other boy whose mulberry-marked face had not been seen since the evening of the Great Fire, but he was not old enough to understand this, and if he had been told that the other boy had gone home in an aircraft, he would have accepted the statement without fuss or disbelief. Henry was a bit of a leader this afternoon because the other 2 were Percival and Johnny, the smallest boys on the island. Percival was mouse-coloured and had not been very attractive even to his mother. Johnny was well-built, with fair hair and a natural belligerence. Just now he was being obedient because he was interested, and the 3 children, kneeling in the sand, were at peace. Roger and Morris came out of the forest. They were relieved from duty at the fire and had come down for a swim. Roger led the way straight through the castles, kicking them over, burying the flowers, scattering the chosen stones. Morris followed, laughing, and added to the destruction. The 3 little uns paused their game and looked up. As it happened, the particular marks on which they were interested had not been touched, so they made no protests. Only Percival began to whimper with an eyeful of sand, and Morris hurried away. In his other life, Morris had received chastisement, that means a kind of telling off, for filling a younger eye with sand. Now, though there was no parent to let fall a heavy hand, Morris still felt the unease of wrongdoing. At the back of his mind formed the uncertain outlines of an excuse. He muttered something about a swim and broke into a trot. Roger remained watching. Okay, guys, I'm just aware of just the chat very quickly. Can we just make sure we're focused, please? Okay, I can see some of you are just asking really sensible questions about where we are on the page, which is absolutely fine, but let's make sure we're keeping it to that. He muttered something about a swim and broke into a trot. Roger remained watching the little ones. He was noticeably darker than when he had dropped in, but the shock of black hair down his nape and low on his forehead seemed to suit his gloomy face, made what seemed at first an unsociable remoteness into something forbidding. Percival finished his whimper and went on playing, for the tears had washed the sand away. Johnny watched him with china blue eyes, then began to fling up sand in a shower, and presently Percival was crying again. When Henry tired of his play and wandered off along the beach, Roger followed him, keeping beneath the palms and drifting casually in the same direction. Henry walked out at a distance from the palms and the shade because he was too young to keep himself out of the sun. He went down on the beach and busied himself at the water's edge. The great Pacific tide was coming in, and every few seconds the relatively still water of the lagoon heaved forwards an inch. There were creatures that lived in this last fling of the sea, tiny transparencies that came questing in with the water over the hot, dry sand. With impalpable organs of sense, they examined this new field. Perhaps food had appeared where, at the last incursion, there had been none. Bird droppings, insects, perhaps any of the strewn detritus of a landward life, like a myriad of tiny teeth in a saw, the transparencies come scavenging over the beast. Over the beach. This was fascinating to Henry. He poked about with a stick that itself was wave-worn and whitened and a vagrant, and tried to control the motions of the scavengers. He made little runnels that the tide filled and tried to crowd them with creatures. He became absorbed beyond mere happiness as he felt himself exercising control over living things. So remember what I was saying about control and power. Henry is starting to feel like he has power and control over things in the natural world, over creatures smaller than him. He talked to them, urging them, ordering them. Driven back by the tide, his footprints became bays in which they were trapped and gave him the illusion of mastery. He squatted on his hands at the water's edge, bowed with a shock of hair falling over his forehead and past his eyes, and the afternoon sun emptied down invisible arrows. Roger waited too. At first he had hidden behind a great palm, but Henry's absorption with the transparencies was so obvious that at last he stood out in full view. He looked along the beach. Percival had gone off crying, and Johnny was left in triumphant possession of the castles. He sat there crooning to himself and throwing sand at an imaginary Percival. Beyond him, Roger could see the platform and the glints of spray where Ralph and Simon and Piggy and Morris were diving in the pool. He listened carefully, but could only just hear them. A sudden breeze shook the fringe of palm trees so that the fronds tossed and fluttered. 60 feet above Roger, several nuts, fibrous lumps as big as rugby balls, were loosed from their stems. They fell about him with a series of hard thumps, and he was not touched. Roger did not consider his escape, but looked from the nuts to Henry and back again. The subsoil beneath the palm trees was a raised beach, and generations of palms had worked loose in this the stones that had lain on the sands of another shore. Roger stooped, picked up a stone, aimed, and threw it at Henry, threw it to miss. The stone, that token of preposterous time, bounced 5 yards to Henry's right and fell in the water. Roger gathered a handful of stones and began to throw them. Yes, there was a space around Henry, perhaps 6 yards in diameter, into which he dare not throw. Here, invisible yet strong, was the taboo of the old life. Round the squatting child was the protection of parents and school and policemen and the law. Roger's arm was conditioned by a civilization that knew nothing of him and was in ruins. Henry was surprised by the plopping sounds in the water. He abandoned the noiseless transparencies and pointed at the centre of the spreading rings like a setter. This side and that, the stones fell, and Henry turned obediently, but always too late to see the stones in the air. At last he saw one and laughed, looking for the friend who was teasing him. But Roger had whipped behind the palm again, was leaning against it, breathing quickly, his eyelids fluttering. Then Henry lost interest in the stones and wandered off. Roger! Jack was standing under a tree about 10 yards away. When Roger opened his eyes and saw him, a darker shadow crept beneath the swarthiness of his skin, but Jack noticed nothing. He was eager, impatient, beckoning so that Roger went to him. There was a small pool at the end of the river, dammed back by sand and full of white water lilies and needle-like reeds. Here, Sam and Eric were waiting, and Bill. Jack, concealed from the sun, knelt by the pool and opened the 2 large leaves that he carried. One of them contained white clay and the other red. By them lay a stick of charcoal brought down from the fire. Jack explained to Roger as he worked. They don't smell me. They see me, I think. Something pink under the trees. He smeared on the clay. If only I'd some green. He turned a half-concealed face up to Roger and answered the incomprehension of his gaze. For hunting, like in the war, dazzle paint, like things trying to look like something else. He twisted in the urgency of telling, like moths on a tree trunk. Roger understood, and he nodded gravely. The twins moved towards Jack and began to protest timidly about something. Jack waved them away. Shut up! He rubbed the charcoal stick between the patches of red and white on his face. No, you two come with me. He peered at his reflection and disliked it. He bent down, took up a double handful of lukewarm water and rubbed the mess from his face. Freckles and sandy eyebrows appeared. Roger smiled unwillingly. You don't half look a mess. Jack planned his new face. He made one cheek and one eye socket white. Then he rubbed red over the other half of his face and slashed a black bar of charcoal across from right ear to left jaw. He looked into the pool for his reflection, but his breathing troubled the mirror. Samnerik, get me a coconut, an empty one. I'll just pause there because I know a couple of people are asking what page we're on for the PDF. If anyone's, because obviously I'm looking at something slightly different. So if anyone who's looking at the PDF could let Isabel and Maisha know. Page 89. Thank you very much, Kezia. Well done. Samnerik, get me a coconut, an empty one. He knelt holding the shell of water. A rounded patch of sunlight fell on his face and a brightness appeared in the depths of the water. He looked in astonishment, no longer at himself, but an awesome stranger. He spilt the water and leapt to his feet, laughing excitedly. Beside the pool, his sinewy body held up a mask that drew his eyes and appalled them. He began to dance, and his laughter became a bloodthirsty snarling. He capered toward Bill, and the mask was a thing on its own, behind which Jack hid, liberated from shame and self-consciousness. The face of red and white and black swung through the air and jigged towards Bill. Bill started up laughing, and then suddenly he fell silent and blundered away through the bushes. Jack rushed toward the twins. The rest are making a line. Come on. Come on, I'll creep up and stab. the mask compelled them. Jack climbed out of the bathing pool and trotted up the beach and sat in the shade beneath the palms. His fair hair was plastered over his eyebrows and he pushed it back. Simon was floating in the water and kicking with his feet, and Morris was practicing diving. Piggy was mooning about, aimlessly picking up things and discarding them. The rock pools which so fascinated him were covered by the tide, so he was without an interest until the tide went. Presently, seeing Ralph under the palms, he came and sat by him. Piggy wore the remainders of a pair of shorts. His fat body was golden brown, and the glasses still flashed when he looked at anything. He was the only boy on the island whose hair never seemed to grow. The rest were shock-headed, but Piggy's hair lay in wisps over his head as though the baldness were his natural state, and this imperfect covering would soon go, like the velvet on a young stag's antlers. And think about that metaphor as well, like deer being like another animal that is hunted. There's lots of the imagery of hunting in here. And think about as well the connection between war and hunting. I've been thinking, he said, about a clock. We can make a sundial. We could put a stick in the sand, and then the effort to express the mathematical process involved was too great. He made a few passes instead. And an airplane and a TV set, said Ralph sourly, and a steam engine. Piggy shook his head. You have to have a lot of metal things for that, he said, and we haven't got no metal, but we've got a stick. Ralph turned and smiled involuntarily. Piggy was a bore. His fat, his arse-mar, and his matter-of-fact ideas were dull, but there was always a little pleasure to be got out of pulling his leg, even if one did it by accident. Piggy saw the smile and misinterpreted it as friendliness. Notice that word there, misinterpreted it. You know, Piggy, there's a sense of Piggy actually had been quite lonely. There had grown up tacitly among the big uns the opinion that Piggy was an outsider, not only by accent, which did not matter, but by fat and arse-mar and specs and a certain disinclination for manual labour, so he doesn't really want to work physically. Now, finding that something he had said made Ralph smile, he rejoiced and pressed his advantage. We've got a lot of sticks. We could have a sundial each, then we could know what the time was. A fat lot of good that would be. Well, you said you wanted things done so as we could be rescued. Oh, shut up. He leapt to his feet and trotted back to the pool, just as Morris did a rather poor dive. Ralph was glad of a chance to change the subject. He shouted as Morris came to the surface, "Belly flop! Belly flop!" Morris flashed a smile at Ralph, who slid easily into the water. Of all the boys, he was the most at home there. But today, irked by the mention of rescue, the useless, footling mention of rescue, even the green depths of water in the shattered gold sun held no balm. Instead of remaining and playing, he swam with steady strokes under Simon and crawled out of the other side of the pool to lie there, sleek and streaming like a seal. Piggy, always clumsy, stood up and came to stand by him, so that Ralph rolled on his stomach and pretended not to see. The mirages had died away, and gloomily he ran his eye along the taut blue line of the horizon. The next moment he was on his feet, shouting, "Smoke! Smoke!" Simon tried to sit up in the water and got a mouthful. Morris, who had been standing, ready to dive, swayed back on his heels, made a bolt for the platform, then swerved back to the grass under the palms. Then he started to pull on his tattered shorts to be ready for anything. Okay, Lola, we'll come back to that in a second, okay? Ralph stood, one holding back his hair, the other clenched. Simon was climbing out of the water. Piggy was rubbing his glasses on his shorts and squinting at the sea. Morris had got both legs through one of his shorts. Of all the boys, only Ralph was still. "I can't see no smoke," said Piggy incredulously. "I can't see no smoke. Ralph, where is it?" Ralph said nothing. Now both hands were clenched over his forehead so that the fair hair was kept out of his eyes. He was leaning forward, and already the salt was whitening his body. Ralph, where's the ship? Simon stood by, looking from Ralph to the horizon. Morris's trousers gave way with a sigh, and he abandoned them as a wreck, rushed toward the forest, and then came back again. The smoke was a tight little knot on the horizon and was uncoiling slowly. Beneath the smoke was a dot that might be a funnel. Ralph's face was pale as he spoke to himself. So what's happening now, and I know a couple of you are asking what's going on, they've noticed a ship in the distance. So they're there and they've seen a ship in the distance. So they've got a chance, if the ship can see the smoke from their signal fire, that they could be rescued. Okay? They'll see our smoke. Piggy was looking in the right direction now. It don't look much. He turned around and peered up the mountain. Ralph continued to watch the ship ravenously. Colour was coming back to his face. Simon stood by him, silent. I know we can't see very much, said Piggy, but have we got any smoke? Ralph moved impatiently, still watching the ship. The smoke on the mountain. Morris came running and stared out to sea. Both Simon and Piggy were looking up at the mountain. Piggy screwed up his face, but Simon cried out as though he'd hurt himself. Ralph! Ralph! The quality of his speech twisted Ralph on the sand. You tell me, said Piggy anxiously, is there a signal? Ralph looked back at the dispersing smoke in the horizon, then up at the mountain. Ralph, please, is there a signal? Ralph put out his hand timidly to touch Ralph, but Ralph started to run, splashing through the shallow end of the bathing pool, across the white hot sand and under the palms. A moment later, he was battling with the complex undergrowth that was already engulfing the scar. Simon ran after him, then Morris. Piggy shouted, Ralph! Please, Ralph! Then he too started to run, stumbling over Morris's discarded shorts before he was across the terrace. Behind the four boys, the smoke moved gently along the horizon, and on the beach, Henry and Johnny were throwing sand at Percival, who was crying quietly again, and all three were in complete ignorance of the excitement. So lots of the other boys don't sort of know what's going on. By the time Ralph had reached the landward end of the scar, he was using precious breath to swear. He did desperate violence to his naked body among the rasping creepers, so that blood was sliding over him. Just where the steep ascent of the mountain began, he stopped. Morris was only a few yards behind him. Piggy's specs, shouted Ralph. If the fire's all out, we'll need them. He stopped shouting and swayed on his feet. Piggy was only just visible, bumbling up from the beach. Ralph looked at the horizon, then up to the mountain. Was it better to fetch Piggy's glasses, or would the ship have gone? Or if they climbed on, supposing the fire was all out and they had to watch Piggy crawling nearer and nearer, the ship sinking under horizon. Balanced on a peak of high need, agonized by indecision, Ralph cried out, Oh God! Oh God! Simon, struggling with the bushes, caught his breath. His face was twisted. Ralph blundered on, savaging himself as the wisp of smoke moved on. The fire was dead. They saw that straight away, saw what they had really known down on the beach when the smoke of home had beckoned. The fire was out, smokeless and dead. The watchers were gone. A pile of unused fuel lay ready. Ralph turned to the sea. The horizon stretched, impersonal once more, barren of all but the faintest trace of smoke. Ralph ran stumbling along the rocks, saved himself on the edge of the pink cliff, and screamed at the ship. Come back! Come back! He ran backwards and forwards along the cliff, his face always to the sea, and his voice rose insanely. Come back! Come back! Simon and Morris arrived. Ralph looked at them with unwinking eyes. Simon turned away, smearing the water from his cheeks. Ralph reached inside himself for the worst word he knew. They let the bloody fire go out. He looked down at the unfriendly side of the mountain. Piggy arrived, out of breath and whimpering like a little one. Ralph clenched his fist and went very red. The intentness of his gaze, the bitterness of his voice pointed for him. There they are. So the people that were supposed to be keeping the fire going have let it go out, and they've missed the opportunity to be rescued because the ship will not have seen their signal fire. There they are. A procession had appeared far down among the pink stones that lay near the water's edge. Some of the boys wore black caps, but otherwise they were almost naked. They lifted sticks in the air together whenever they came to an easy patch. They were chanting, something to do with the bundle that the errant twins carried so carefully. Ralph picked out Jack easily, even at that distance, tall, red-haired, and inevitably leading the procession. Simon looked now from Ralph to Jack as he had looked from Ralph to the horizon, and what he saw seemed to make him afraid. Ralph said nothing more, but waited while the procession came nearer. The chant was audible, but at that distance still wordless. Behind Jack walked the twins, carrying a great stake on their shoulders. The gutted carcass of a pig swung from the stake, swinging heavily as the twins toiled over the uneven ground. The pig's head hung down with gaping neck and seemed to search for something on the ground. At last, the words of the chant floated up to them across the bowl of blackened wood and ashes. Kill the pig, cut her throat, spill her blood. Yet as the words became audible, the procession reached the steepest part of the mountain, and in a minute or two, the chant had died away. Piggy snivelled, and Simon shushed him quickly, as though he had spoken too loudly in church. Jack, his face smeared with clays, reached the top first and hailed Ralph excitedly with a lifted spear. "Look, we've killed a pig. We've stole up on them. We've got in a circle." Voices broke in from the hunters. "We got in a circle. We crept up. The pig squealed." The twins stood with the pig swinging between them, dropping black gouts on the rock. They seemed to share one wide, ecstatic grin. Jack had too many things to tell Ralph at once. Instead, he danced a step or two, then remembered his dignity and stood still, grinning. He noticed blood on his hands and grimaced distastefully, looking for something on which to clean them, then wiped them on his shorts and laughed. Ralph spoke. "You let the fire go out." Jack checked, vaguely irritated by this irrelevance, but too happy to let it worry him. "We can light the fire again. You should have been with us, Ralph. We had a smashing time. The twins got knocked over. We hit the pig. I fell on top." "I cut the pig's throat," said Jack proudly, and twitched as he said it. "Can I borrow yours, Ralph, to make a nick in the hilt?" "That's okay, Lola." The boys chatted and danced. The twins continued to grin. "There were lashings of blood," said Jack, laughing and shuddering. "You should have seen it. We'll go hunting every day." Ralph spoke again, hoarsely. He'd not moved. "You let the fire go out." Why did it take him so long to kill a pig? Really, really good question. Maybe you could have like a discussion as I'm reading in the chat. But also, just think about, would you be able to kill a pig just really quickly for the first time? I don't think I would. This repetition made Jack uneasy. He looked at the twins, then back at Ralph. "We had to have them in the hunt," he said, "or there wouldn't have been enough for a ring." He flushed, conscious of a fault. "Fire's only been out an hour or two. We can light it up again." He noticed Ralph's scarred nakedness and the sombre silence of all four of them. He sought, charitable in his happiness, to include them in the thing that had happened. His mind was crowded with memories. It's a really nice answer, Sophie. Crowded with memories, the memories of the knowledge that had come to them when they closed in on the struggling pig. That's a less good answer, Julia. Knowledge that they had outwitted a living thing, imposed their will upon it, taken away its life like a long, satisfying drink. He spread his arms wide. "You should have seen the blood." The hunters were more silent now. But at this, they buzzed again. Ralph flung back his hair. One arm pointed at the empty horizon. His voice was loud and savage, and struck them into silence. "There was a ship." Jack, faced at once with too many awful implications, ducked away from them. He laid a hand on the pig and drew his knife. Ralph brought his arm down, fist clenched, and his voice shook. There was a ship out there. You said you'd keep the fire going, and you let it out. He took a step towards Jack, who turned and faced him. They might have seen us. We might have gone home. This was too bitter for Piggy, who forgot his timidity in the agony of his loss. He began to cry out shrilly, "You and your blood, Jack married you. You and your hunting. We might have gone home." Ralph pushed Piggy to one side. "I was chief, and you were going to do what I said. You talk, but you can't even build huts. Then you go off hunting and let out the fire." He turned away, silent for a moment. Then his voice came. I know, Amber, it's 2:00. We're very, very near the end of the chapter. Okay? Then his voice came. He turned away, silent for a moment. Then his voice came again on a peak of feeling. There was a ship. One of the smaller hunters began to wail. The dismal truth was filtering through to everybody. Jack went very red as he hacked and pulled at the pig. The job was too much. We needed everyone. Ralph turned. You could have had everyone when the shelters were finished, but you had to hunt. Well, we needed meat. Jack stood up as he said this, the bloodied knife in his hand. The two boys faced each other. There was the brilliant world of hunting, tactics, fierce exhilaration, skill, and there was the world of longing and baffled common sense. Jack transferred the knife to his left hand and smudged blood over his forehead as he pushed down the plastered hair. Piggy began again. Okay, so we can't carry on tomorrow. Honestly, it's about 5 minutes left. If you have to leave, okay, because you've got something else, okay, we're only going to be 5 more minutes. This is going to be uploaded onto YouTube, but we're very, very close to the end of the chapter. So if you can stick around, do stick around with me for about 5 more minutes, okay? Piggy began again. You didn't ought to have let that fire out. You said you'd keep the smoke going. This from Piggy, and the wails of agreement from some of the hunters drove Jack to violence. The bolting look came into his blue eyes. He took a step, and able at last to hit someone, struck his fist into Piggy's stomach. Piggy sat down with a grunt. Jack stood over him. His voice was vicious with humiliation. Yes, Sophie. You would you, fatty? Ralph made a step forward, and Jack smacked Piggy's head. Piggy's glasses flew off and tinkled on the rocks. Piggy cried out in terror. My specs! He went crouching and feeling over the rocks, but Simon, who got there, found them for him. Passions beat about Simon on the mountaintop with awful wings. One side's broken. Piggy grabbed and put on the glasses. He looked malevolently, that means evilly, at Jack. I've got to have them specs. Now I've only got just one eye. You wait. Jack made a move toward Piggy, who scrambled away till a great rock lay between them. He thrust his head over the top and glared at Jack through his one flashing glass. Now I've only got one eye. Just you wait. Jack mimicked his whine and scrambled. Just you wait, yeah. Piggy in the parody was so funny that the hunters began to laugh. So, like, the bullying of Piggy really escalates now. Jack felt encouraged. He went on scrambling, and the laughter rose to a gaze of hysteria. Unwillingly, Ralph felt his lips twitch. He was angry with himself for giving way. He muttered, that was a dirty trick. Jack broke out of his gyration and stood facing Ralph. His words came in a shout. All right, all right. He looked at Piggy, at the hunters, at Ralph. I'm sorry about the fire. I mean, he drew himself up. I apologise. The buzz from the hunters was one of admiration at this handsome behaviour. Clearly, they were of the opinion that Jack had done the decent thing, had put himself in the right by his generous apology, and Ralph obscurely in the wrong. They waited for an appropriately decent answer. Yet Ralph's throat refused to pass one. He resented, as an addition to Jack's misbehaviour, this verbal trick. The fire was dead, the ship was gone. Could they not see? Anger instead of decency passed his throat. That was a dirty trick. They were silent on the mountaintop while the opaque look appeared in Jack's eyes and passed away. Ralph's final word was an ingracious mutter. All right, light the fire. With some positive action before them, a little of the tension died. Ralph said no more, did nothing, stood looking down at the ashes around his feet. Jack was loud and active. He gave orders, sang, whistled, threw remarks at the silent Ralph, remarks that did not need an answer and therefore could not invite a snub. And Ralph was still silent. No one, not even Jack, would ask him to move, and in the end they had to build the fire 3 yards away and in a place not really as convenient. So Ralph asserted his chieftainship and could not have chosen a better way if he had thought for days. Against this weapon, so indefinable and so effective, Jack was powerless and raged without knowing why. By the time the pile was built, they were on different sides of a high barrier. Okay, I'm just going to... 2 pages left. Okay, I'm going to just rush through it. When they had dealt with the fire, another crisis arose. Jack had no means of lighting it. Then, to his surprise, Ralph went to Piggy and took the glasses from him. Not even Ralph knew how a link between him and Jack had been snapped and fastened elsewhere. I'll bring him back. I'll come too. Piggy stood behind him, islanded in a sea of meaningless colour, while Ralph knelt and focused on the glossy spot. Instantly, the fire was alight. Piggy held out his hands and grabbed the glasses back. Before these fantastically attractive flowers of violet and red and yellow, unkindness melted away. They became a circle of boys around a campfire, and even Piggy and Ralph were half drawn in. Soon some of the boys were rushing down the slope for more wood, while Jack hacked the pig. They tried holding the whole carcass on a stake over the fire, but the stake burnt more quickly than the pig roasted. In the end, they skewered bits of meat on branches and held them in the flames, and even then, almost as much boy was roasted as meat. Ralph's mouth watered. He meant to refuse meat, but his past diet of fruit and nuts with an odd crab or fish gave him too little resistance. He accepted a piece of half-raw meat and gnawed it like a wolf. Notice how the boys are becoming more and more animalistic. Piggy spoke, also dribbling. Aren't I having none? Jack had meant to leave him in doubt as an assertion of power, but Piggy, by advertising his omission, made more cruelty necessary. You didn't hunt. No more did Ralph, said Piggy wetly, nor Simon, he amplified. There isn't more than a ha'porth of meat in a crab. Ralph stirred uneasily. Simon, sitting between the twins, and Piggy wiped his mouth and shoved his piece of meat over the rocks to Piggy, who grabbed it. The twins giggled, and Simon lowered his face in shame. Then Jack leapt to his feet, slashed off a great hunk of meat and flung it down at Simon's feet. Eat, damn you! He glared at Simon. Take it! He spun on his heel, centre of a bewildered circle of boys. I got you meat. Numberless and inexpressible frustrations combined to make his rage elemental and awe-inspiring. I painted my face. I stole up. Now you eat, all of you. And I... Slowly the silence on the mountaintop deepened till the click of the fire and the soft hiss of roasting meat could be heard clearly. Jack looked round for understanding, but found only respect. Ralph stood among the ashes of the signal fire, his hands full of meat, saying nothing. Then at last Morris broke the silence. He changed the subject to the only one that could bring the vast majority of them together. Where did you find the pig? Roger pointed down the unfriendly side. They were there, by the sea. Jack, recovering, could not bear to have his story told. He broke in quickly. We spread round. I crept on, hands and knees. The spears fell out because they hadn't barbs on. The pig ran away and made an awful noise. It turned back and ran into the circle, bleeding. All the boys were talking at once, relieved and excited. We closed in. The first blow had paralysed its hindquarters so that the circle could close in and beat and beat. I cut the pig's throat. The twins, still sharing their identical grin, jumped up and ran round each other. Then the rest joined in, making pig-dying noises and shouting. One for his knob? That means like his lordship. Give him a 4-penny one. Then Morris pretended to be the pig and ran squealing into the centre, and the hunters, circling still, pretended to beat him. As they danced, they sang, "Kill the pig, cut her throat, bash her in." Ralph watched them, envious and resentful. Not till they flagged did the chant died away did he speak. "I'm calling an assembly." One by one, they halted, stood watching him. "With the conch, I'm calling a meeting, even if we have to go on into the dark. Down on the platform when I blow it. Now." He turned away and walked off down the mountain. Okay, so, ladies, thank you very much for sticking around. So what we've seen in this chapter, okay, is the kind of descent into cruelty and inhumanity. We've seen the bullying of Piggy reach a kind of peak where Jack really quite cruelly beats him. We've seen the boys kind of get really bloodthirsty, actually, in terms of their hunting of the pig and the excitement that they've got because they've finally been able to kill this pig. We've seen in some ways Ralph be able to assert his leadership because his main rival, Jack, has really messed up in terms of letting the signal fire go out because they've lost the ability to be rescued, okay? So we're seeing throughout this chapter the descent into chaos and inhumanity, okay? Hopefully you've got quite a lot out of that, okay? What I'd like you to do in the coming week, obviously, is complete the tasks on this chapter in the workbook on class charts. And I'd like you to work on the next chapter as well, okay? So if you could read chapter 5 independently, I'll kind of see where we're at, but we will read either chapter 5, probably, in fact, we'll read chapter 6 in a webinar next week, and we'll run it the same way. So I'll open up a Google form where you can ask any questions and we can deal with any kind of misconceptions. But hopefully you found a way to... thank you very much, Kezia. That's really kind of you to say. And Taz, very, very happy to run these sessions. Hopefully you're getting a lot out of them. So like I say, I'll send you a message on class charts. I'll send an email home about this session next week. I hope you're enjoying the book. No worries, guys. Thank you very much for your thanks. Thank you for all of your really intelligent comments as well. Some really, really good questions and some really, really nice engagement there. Okay, so really, really fantastic. Well done. I'm going to sort of close the meeting now. But take care and I'll see you next week. Okay.